So today I just wanted to take a quick look at Salem's Lot. This is the 1979 miniseries based off of the second book written by Stephen King, which of course shares the same title. So to me, the curiosity or the interest here has always been, and I have never found anything to prove it, but I assume the answer is yes, that the character of Mr. Barlow is heavily based on Nosferatu, of course, 1979. We also have the release of the Nosferatu remake. So we basically had a double up of the same-ish looking vampire the same year. Of course, you really don't see Mr. Barlow too much in the miniseries. It is definitely very much a slow burn. This story, it clocks in at roughly just a little over 3 hours, but I found it very dull. I had seen this as a kid during a re-airing on network television. Even then at the time I thought it was dull. Of course, when you're a kid, basically something that's slow-paced isn't going to hold your interest, so I'm not going to hold that, against anyone, but re-watching it earlier this month, I still saw it as slow-paced. I didn't find it as boring because they did take the time to develop the characters and sort of give you a feel of what's going on. The sense that I got here is that the film reads very much like a Alexandre Dumas novel, and that's not a compliment. Obviously, Dumas writes very long books. There's a lot going on. There are tons of characters. And at some point or another, it's hard to follow what's going on because you forget who's who and how they're related to X event. So that's the same issue I had with Salem's Lot. Not that I'm trying to speak ill of the book. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad story, but to me it just felt like, even though it's a 3-hour long movie, it felt like there was a lot going on and various characters that just kind of popped up here and there, and then they disappeared, and then they were back, and it's like, wait a minute, you were doing such and such, so what are you doing back? Or wait a minute, you were gone for so long, I forget how you relate to this story. So that's the issue I had with the mini-series. So I'm not dumping on director Tobe Hooper. I think he did an excellent job. I think maybe it might have been the screenplay, or maybe it's just the fact that I'm not too familiar with the novel itself. I read it once a long time ago. I really do not remember too much. So watching the film was very much a crash course speed run here in the events that take place in the film. So I want to pretty much just own that myself and say that's the reason why I had trouble following it. But I think it was very well presented. Obviously, there are certain scenes which are, I guess you could say, extremely dated. The one scene where the dog has been killed is very obviously a puppet, but my complaint with that one scene is that the pan over to the dog is just so slow, and I assume it's to build tension, which to some degree it does. The music also does help, but it takes so long to get there, and it's very obvious what has happened. By the time they're halfway there, I'm thinking to myself, just show me the darn dog already and let's move on, but obviously animal abuse is no laughing matter, but I'm talking about a puppet dog here. But so there are certain scenes that they just really do drag out. They kind of test my patience a little bit, but for the most part, yes, it's a very well done story. I like the idea of very much like when a vampire needs to gain access to a home. He cannot enter until he is invited. So that is basically how Mr. Barlow came to Salem's Lot. He was invited in essentially by the purchase of a home which was made for him. A house was bought for him, which gave him permission to come in because he had a place to go to. He had something that was essentially a resting place. So I think also it's very much the sense of, kind of like the, when you have like a large, I guess you could say, concentration of people that are really not all that great, a large gathering of essentially bad people. I assume that is what drew Mr. Barlow to this area. So that was his appeal in coming to Salem's Lot. He sensed a high volume of wickedness in which he could feed and prey upon. So, to my knowledge, David Soul was the only big name in this film. I could be wrong. He's just the only person I was familiar with, obviously, because Starsky and Hutch. To my understanding, he also had a singing career. To my knowledge, I have never heard or listened to any of his music, but I would be surprised if I do run across something that I am familiar with, because that does happen to me very regularly. I'm not good with names of people or titles of songs. I'm better with just recognizing sounds. But to my understanding, he was the big draw in this film. He is the one who basically was there as the main star power, essentially. So one of the main scenes in this film which really caught my attention was between young Mark and one of his friends who obviously had been attacked by a vampire. He has now become a vampire himself, and the young boy is floating outside his bedroom window. He's scratching at the window, basically just saying, "Mark, let me in." Basically just begging to be invited into the home so he could feed on his friend. So to me, it's probably a very obvious reference, is of course because I used to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer a lot as a kid. But of course the lead guy, Mark, played by Luke Perry, we have this very same scene occurring between him and David Arquette, who is the deceased friend, once again floating outside the bedroom window and basically demanding, "Let me in, Mark." So that was an obvious aha, I see you, when watching this film. But really, for the most part, I don't think too many other films in pop culture have referenced Salem's Lot too much. I could be wrong, but obviously the young boy Mark was played by Lance Kerwin. To my understanding, he was mostly just known for James at 15. He also played, I believe, in the Bionic Woman TV series, and of course I didn't know who he was at the time, so I wouldn't have known who was in the movie, but he was also in the 1995 film Outbreak. So I would definitely have to go back and rewatch that just to see if I can pick him out. But other than that, in this film, there weren't too many people who stood out. But of course, my main era is not the 1970s, so I'm not too familiar with the actors of the 70s. But as I've said, the film itself is a very slow burn. We do have Barlow, who has his henchmen. He's working his way through various townspeople, but you also, to a degree, witness this corruption that I was hinting at. Of course, you've got the wife who is cheating on her husband, and I especially love the way that this scene was written. It's very Stephen King, the dialogue, and the way that it was handled. Is, of course, the husband comes in, he catches the guy with his wife, and he's holding the shotgun up to the guy's face. He's going through a spiel, and then he pulls the trigger. Obviously, the guy pretty much just wets his pants almost, but he runs out of the house, terrified. And that is very much the characterization that I am accustomed to reading in Stephen King novels, which is why I'm saying the scene was very Stephen King. I would not be surprised if that scene was lifted from the book exactly, because it really does feel like Stephen King. Obviously, the film is adapted from one of his novels, but I'm aware of the fact that things get changed and altered, and as I previously stated, I read the book a very long time ago, but I do not remember it for the life of me. I wish I had had time to read the book before sitting and doing this review for you guys so that I could do a proper comparison. Unfortunately, I ran short on time, so that is what it is. I apologize. But, you know, for the most part, not a bad film. I know this is just very much a brush over. So this brings us into the supposed Salem's Lot sequel, A Return to Salem's Lot. This was a 1987 limited theatrical release directed by Larry Cohen. It is considered a sequel, although as far as I'm concerned, it's more of a spin-off. It really doesn't kind of seem to follow within the same universe. It takes its own liberties. It becomes its own standalone film. So even if you hadn't seen the original Salem's Lot, there is no Ben Myers, there's no reference to any of the previous characters. So essentially very much a standalone or spin-off type film. So I really, for the most part, don't even consider this part of the actual Salem's Lot. I guess you could say the original lineup as far as franchise-wise. But it is definitely an interesting film. I can definitely see that it did have potential, but for some reason it took a few wrong turns, and what potentially could have been a very good and interesting film pretty much just winds up becoming very laughable and cheesy, unfortunately, because, I mean, you've got some decent acting, you've obviously got some good dialogue going on. It's just, I don't know if it's just the presentation or what the deal is, but for some reason for me this film just really misses the mark. So we have an anthropologist by the name of Joe Weber. At the beginning of the film, he is witnessing, I guess you could say, somewhat of an emasculation of a tribes member, because he has impregnated one of the chief's favorite wives. Of course, this, I guess you could say, is somewhat of a very primitive tribe, South American tribe. I'm really not too sure what ethnicity. I just really did not catch that. I do not recall. I apologize. But he is basically, as punishment, being emasculated. Of course, within these types of tribes, it is also customary to punish the woman as well. There is no mention of what happened to her. We are only witnessing the emasculation of this man. And of course, as the crew is filming this for a documentary, people are just kind of coming down on Mr. Joe Weber because he is not intervening. And obviously, as a documentarian, one cannot intervene. That is the rule, which is very well known. But you know, they, I guess, want to bring to light how distant he is from possibly humanity, human emotion, and just how engrossed he is in his work. So this definitely does appeal to members of a very small town, members of Jerusalem's Lot, who he had grown up in that town. Obviously, as a child, he did not notice anything off. Of course, he moved away and he went on to live his own life. So he inherits pretty much, I guess you could say, a condemned home from a woman who he grew up referring to as his aunt, even though she was not blood related. So obviously we discover that she herself was a vampire. He had been in the midst of these vampires the entire time, although yes, he was kept safe as a human. No one obviously exposed him to what was really going on, and he went on to live a normal life. So he is basically being drawn back to this town because word has gotten out that he is an anthropologist, and they basically want him to write some sort of a, I guess you could say, somewhat of a vampire Bible, or documenting their history, just kind of exposing them as actual living beings that are not a mythological, that are not a mythological creature. So he is going through their town history. He's originally he wanted to leave, but it's his, I guess you could say, his scientific curiosity that held him there. he also does have a rambunctious son with him who takes a liking to a young girl. So obviously his son wants to stay. The young girl is actually played by a very young Tara Reid, and this is actually her film debut. Maybe not too noticeable, but you know, we all definitely know the lovely young woman that she grew up to become. Part of the catch here, I guess you could say, is that an old love interest of Joe is being used as incentive to keep him there. On their first night, he is reunited with this girl. It is my assumption that they were both human at the same time, because she said that she chose to remain beautiful for him. She kept herself the way that he remembered him intentionally. So if I'm remembering correctly, she was 16 at the time that he knew her, and he was 3 years younger. So she is essentially a vampire trapped in teenage form, which one could say is, yeah, fairly disgusting, because now he's this, you know, used up older man that has come back to the town, and obviously they have a, I guess you could say, a welcome back liaison. But, you know, taking the whole vampire issue into account, she is essentially his same age. So even though she looks younger, it's definitely not a actual transgression here that's going on. But obviously this is a repeat encounter. It is not long before she is with child. So this vampire-human hybrid actually grows at a quicker rate. We also come to discover that the vampires keep what they refer to as drones. So they manage the town as the vampires sleep in order to keep a regular or normal appearance, just for the sake of not drawing suspicion. So obviously they pretty much just do the dirty work. They're somewhat servants. They are treated as inferior, and on occasion they do have blood drawn from them, although the vampires in the town keep cattle for their feeding purposes. As they're able to drink more, the cows replenish obviously much more quickly because it's a larger animal. So there are definitely some interesting things here. One of the things I did forget to mention is on their first night there, as Joe is being taken to the mayor's house, or drawn to the mayor's house, and this whole thing proposed to him, his son goes off with this younger girl, obviously the character played by Tara Reid, and they pretty much just witness a vampire wedding. Obviously no one knows, or at least the young boy did not know, that they were vampires at the time. So we witness what we assume are two very young children getting married. Obviously this is not a different culture in which children are married to one another to ensure that marriage happens at virginity, but they're actually two consenting adults trapped in child form. So in itself it is interesting, but they do try to, I guess you could say, pull in some more humorous or light moments in the film as well. There's a scene at the beginning, once again, in which a victim is taken. There are several elderly women or mature women that feast upon a younger teenage girl, and I don't know if it's just for the sake of vanity or just showing that they are just regular women, but it just comes off as totally cheesy and hilarious. As once they feast upon this woman, you can see the women grooming themselves. They're touching up their face powder, their lipstick. It's just funny to me. But yeah, I mean, you know, after eating, I guess it is normal for a woman to touch up her makeup or groom herself a bit. But you know, definitely an interesting touch there. This film, as I did mention, did receive a limited theatrical release, which is also part of the reason why I consider it more of a spin-off, because obviously the 1979 Salem's Lot was more of a television film. It was a mini-series, and then this one gets a limited theatrical release, but it very much has the made-for-TV feel to it. Why it was given a limited release, I have no earthly idea, but definitely very interesting. So I had originally assumed that the film was never released to DVD, but there actually is an option to acquire this film on DVD. To my knowledge, it still has not received a Blu-ray option, but I could be mistaken. So this film was released in 2010 under the Warner Archive Collection as the Burn on Demand option, and I have had several films printed under this option as far as the Burn on Demand, and from the different versions that I have owned, the print is fairly decent, but I have not seen the Salem's Lot version. I'm just speaking on previous films that I've owned. Sorry about the minor confusion there, but from the ones that I had requested as Burn on Demand, they did clean up the picture, but it does keep that VHS transfer look to it. So it's not a perfect clean picture, but fairly decent. I don't know if they have changed their methods, because the last time I ordered something was over 4 years ago, so the technology may have improved. I could be wrong, but I'd say, yeah, for the most part, it's a fairly goofy movie. I really don't take it too seriously. I consider it more of a time killer movie. For some odd reason, the child vampires sleep underneath the school. Why, I don't know. But we also have just kind of like this weird subplot where you have a Nazi hunter who comes into the hometown, or the vampire town rather, and the man he is pursuing, who was a Nazi at one point in time, is obviously now a vampire. He is an experienced vampire hunter, and of course he and Joe take it upon themselves to clean up the town. So they do go into houses during daylight. They set the homes on fire, and of course they are at some point, I guess you could say apprehended. They break loose, but it's during the film's climax that I find very hilarious, because they're setting these coffins on fire, daylight's coming up, the vampires have nowhere to go because their homes are also being set on fire. But I guess you could say they did it for dramatic effect, is that they have gone through and they've dumped this fluid over the coffins, then they go with the torch and they, light each one individually, which, yeah, I mean, would have been very dramatic had they actually lit the coffins with gasoline rather than kerosene, which tends to light and burn more slowly. So it's kind of like, these goofy vampires actually could have put out the fire and still have had a resting place logically. There's even a scene, once again, I guess for dramatic effect, where we have the child actress, Tara Reid, who I guess is just desperate because she has nowhere else to go, and she lays down in her burning coffin screaming the entire time, and it's like, you doof, dig a hole or something, but I don't know, it's just, just kind of very laughable at some points. I mean, the story is decent. It's not necessarily a weak story, but there are plot holes, and then there are those moments that just kind of leave you like, what the devil is going on here? But I'd say, just for the sake of just saying that you've seen it, or even if you're just doing a Salem's Lot marathon, yeah, I would say definitely include this. I mean, you've got some decent acting here, so I mean, it's not necessarily a bad film. It's just I myself personally found it very laughable and not very believable, which, unfortunately, like I said, the film definitely had potential. It could have been so much better than what we wound up with, but it is what it is. But yeah, but I'd actually like to go more into detail on the 2004 remake of this same miniseries, the one starring Rob Lowe. So the first major difference here, obviously, is how the film opens up. We have Rob Lowe, who is very much a homeless guy. He is confronting a priest at a homeless shelter, and essentially they get into a bit of a tussle. They fall out, I believe, a 2-story window and land in a hospital. So the way the film is presented is, this is the story that Ben Myers, played by Rob Lowe, is telling to a very judgmental orderly. Obviously, the orderly is giving him this nonsense of how dare you attack a priest, and you're going to have a lot to reckon with, and all this other nonsense. And of course, Ben Myers responds with, well, this is what happened. So we do have small cuts here and there where we come back to the orderly and Ben Myers, but I don't know, it's a very attention-grabbing intro in comparison to where we have Ben Myers and the young boy Mark, who are pretty much at a, I guess you could say, a Mexican ruin is what the place looks like. So they're grabbing your attention right from the beginning. Of course, filmmaking in the 2000s, early 2000s, is very much different from the 1970s variation of style and era of storytelling. So I do understand that, but this definitely does hold the interest for me right from the beginning. So once again, we open with Ben Myers coming into the town. He stops to inquire about the abandoned house, wanting to purchase it. Obviously, it's been sold off to someone else, so he winds up having to stay at a boarding house. So once again, Ben Myers is a writer. He has supposedly come back to the small town of Jerusalem's Lot because he is researching the Marston house. Obviously, a lot of dark things occurred there, and this is what holds his interest. So he wants to write his new book about this. Of course, it isn't long before he is outed, and people discover that he's not really writing about the house. It's more the town itself and I guess you could say, the dark and seedy things that occur there, which of course quickly makes him an outcast, because especially in a small town, who wants their dirty laundry aired out to the masses? Of course, being a writer, a very well-known writer, no one wants their secrets to be known, which I guess you could say is just very very relatable to just anyone in general, whether you grew up in a small town or in a city. You want to keep your business to yourself. But that very quickly makes him an outcast. He does not back down or change course. Of course, he continues upon his way. In this version, of course, the cheating wife is perhaps more heinous than the wife in the original. Obviously, she was just a wife after Nookie, I guess you could say. But in this version, she is a battered woman who basically her husband has put her up to the task of reeling in a doctor so that he could be extorted for money, or rather that's what the turnaround wound up becoming after she was found out. But I like the fact that this film kind of carries as more of an intermediate approach to the film or to the novel itself. They definitely give you the material, but they leave a lot for you to read between the lines, to fill in the blanks for yourself. Obviously, if you're watching the original and the remake back to back, you actually get more detail on scenes that led up to certain events within the original and vice versa. So you're definitely not missing anything if you skipped out on the novel and are just jumping into this head first with the original film and then moving on to the 2004 version. So I found that very helpful in the sense that, like I said, it definitely filled in a lot of blanks for me here and there. But definitely a lot more enjoyable film. Obviously, you also do have Rob Lowe, who is not a bad-looking guy. He's easy on the eyes. He's definitely not the well-polished or groomed pretty boy type. So I really do like how the film was presented. Definitely holds my interest a lot more than the original. Of course, the premise is the same. Barlow had to be invited in. You also have a segment that is added in this version of the film that either blew over my head in the original, but I can swear they were not referenced at all, which is basically one of the henchmen working with Barlow. He has an inappropriate relationship with his daughter. So they don't show anything, of course. It's implied. It's even discussed between a father-daughter, father-girlfriend during the film. But, you know, obviously it's network television, so they keep it clean. That was completely omitted from the original. I believe also the issue with the young man who happened to be mentally challenged. I think he was also omitted from the original film. But I definitely did enjoy the 2004 remake a lot more. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but as previously stated, it very much is one of those for me at least, it's one of those films that there really is a lot going on. You really have to pay attention to keep up. Obviously, I had watched the 1979 version before jumping into the remake, so to some degree, yes, I was able to follow along a lot more easily, but there really is a lot going on with this film. But I will just leave it there. If you have seen either version, or if you're a fan of the original, I would definitely love to share thoughts with you. But that is all I have for you guys today, and I will talk to you later.